Hello everyone and welcome to the Commexis cast, all the news you need to know from our box to yours. Today we're talking about the GDPR and its impact on ad prices. Hello everyone, I'm Matthew McGrorty, the videographer and podcaster here at Commexis, and today I am joined by the lead strategist at Commexis, Phillip Brooks.
Good morning.
And the paid placement specialist here at Commexis, James Van Horn.
Good morning.
Also known as Jim, so we'll be calling you Jim all the show, hopefully. So today we're talking about an eMarketer report that discussed the impact of GDPR on ad prices both in the EU and in the US. So for those of our listeners and those of our viewers who aren't really familiar with GDPR, though I'm sure if you've gotten a ton of privacy policy update emails in the last couple of months, you might have a faint hint of what it kind of is. Jim, could you give us just a little bit of background on it?
Sure. Basically, in a nutshell, what it is it's to protect the user. Mm-hmm. So before, cookies and different tracking codes and pixels could be placed on a user session. So it would follow them around, and it helped with things like remarketing or gathering user data to then target them in different outlets, obviously from an advertising focus. But what GDPR did was, in at least the European Union, which, eventually we can definitely see is going global, since, as you said, the initial impact isn't that great from an advertising standpoint, and people are learning how to advertise better to the end user. And really what happens in the end is you get a more focused target, because it's a lot of people that now have to opt in. So now what's required of any website in the European Union, and even North American websites, if they're marketing over to Europe, is there has to be plenty of opportunity for the user to opt out of being tracked. So much of this is coming in the form, I'm sure anybody's seen if they've been on like a big website that's global. It's just a little drop down box, goes in a little bit more detail and says if you want to opt out, you can opt out here. And at that point, everything behind the scenes stop tracking that user. Now you still see it because, ultimately it boils down to anonymity. So you can still see the data in tracking platforms like analytics, but they just won't show you things like IP address or try to scrape any additional information about the user. So you can still report and track behavior and users on your website. You just can't get the in-depth information that you may have gotten before without their consent.
Absolutely.
Now, if they click OK, they're fine with it, or yeah, go ahead, place whatever cookies you want, then nothing has changed. The only other aspect that really affects websites is because of how conscious people are now about giving out their information, there has to be plenty of disclaimers saying that we're using it for this explicit purpose. So, gone are the days of just having a little disclaimer at the bottom of a form fill saying, please provide us your information, thanks and bye. Now it will have to read something like, we are gathering your information for use in marketing efforts, and give them a secondary gateway to opt out again. So if they want to submit information to you for, say, like a quote on an auto dealer website, that's fine. But then by them checking off they don't want to receive marketing material, or they don't want to be tracked any further, then all that stuff has to be wiped clean.
Yeah, there's a really great example of this on social media site Tumblr. So all of the social media sites, because their websites obviously also had to update their privacy policies and stuff like that, and the kinds of different data that they can track you. Facebook had this whole big thing where it popped up, said, hey, this is exactly how we're using your data, this is how you can change all these things. But Tumblr, I know because I use the site pretty frequently, had a drop-down menu that contained probably 300 companies, where it was like, you had to opt out of each one individually, and then go to another page for the secondary layer and opt out of them again for all of this stuff. So just goes to show, this is a really big thing that's definitely going to be affecting a lot of things, including having an impact on ad prices. So into the eMarketer piece, so Ezoic analyzed CPMs for 126 different publishers to see how the GDPR may have affected their ad prices. 42 of them were from the EU and 42 of them were from the US. And Ezoic found that while ad prices had dropped in the EU following the GDPR enforcement on May 25th, they actually rose in the US. And since it went into effect, the watchdog overseeing the GDPR has received more than 1,300 complaints. And a lot of those are, due to anxiousness that the GDPR is creating among company executives. There's been a lot more use of it in executive calls and different kind of board meeting sort of things. So, Jim, can you go a little bit into how and why this would affect ad pricing the way that it has?
Well, I mean, ad prices will definitely fluctuate because, especially when you talk about platforms like programmatic. Programmatic platforms are there as a step up from something like traditional display advertising on Google or Facebook, because you're paying to access data of users. So obviously there's additional enforcement that needs to happen. I guess primarily the biggest thing that would affect the cost of those platforms to go up for any advertiser is they now have to employ a data officer.
Yeah.
And it's not cheap. I think I saw that the average salary for that person is over between $70,000 and $80,000.
Oh man!
So depending on the size of the company, you may need more than one.
Yeah.
So when you're a large-scale platform like that, or a data management platform like that, and you have to obviously pay for additional resources, that has to come out of somewhere. So yes, the ad prices went up, but again, it's just because of the security. So overall, it should benefit the advertisers, and almost, at least in my eyes, what I'm seeing is wiping away all the garbage. All the websites where maybe an ad appeared before that was maybe not the highest quality, or maybe had content that wasn't really relatable, but they put their inventory up there, so now they're eligible for ad placement. The platform wants to spend the money, so they'll place it there. Well, now those type of websites don't have the money to enforce GDPR. So if they're a global website, they're either going to take down their ad inventory altogether, or those websites are going to disappear. So that again will affect price, because now you have the law of supply and demand. You have a lot of demand for advertising, but you have less supply in the form of reach on websites that you can advertise on. So that will affect it as well. But honestly, I mean, for first-party data from what we see, I've definitely seen an increase in Facebook ad cost, but not by too much. I mean, you're talking about maybe going from 60 cents to 90 cents, or 90 cents to $1.20. And much of that is probably due to Facebook is taking on the brunt of making sure everything's in compliance. So as long as you're not collecting data, or you're not integrating some kind of third-party API into the platform, and you're just advertising, then, I mean, since the onus is on them to get everything up to code, then yeah, the 30, 40, 50 cent increase, it's still lower than you'd ever get on something like paid search, or affiliate marketing or banner marketing, and still get better results.
Okay. So you mentioned, obviously they're going to have to add these data officers to the position. What about just the general loss in revenue from not being able to monetize the data sharing that they're doing? So I mean, a lot of these platforms, for example, Facebook, that's the majority of how they make their money, is they compile all this data from their users and they sell it to other marketing companies. So that's a revenue stream that's also being lost when this switch gets turned on for GDPR.
No, absolutely right.
Yeah, and just one small note, the article also mentioned that in the EU, which, we're primarily focused in the United States, but obviously, there might be some people out there who are marketing to the European Union. They noticed that their ad rates went down a little bit, and that there were some companies that were not super happy with the returns they were getting and stuff like that. But they did notice that in April, it was actually lower than it is in June after the GDPR, so there is some expectation that, that's going to recover a little bit. So there you go. Just a small note at the end of our show here. There was another eMarketer piece that I really liked that talked about users and their data sharing beliefs, specifically in regard to the GDPR and all this advertising sort of things. So Salathrough polled 2,000 U.S. internet users in May about their dating share beliefs. Most respondents were very uncomfortable with brands buying and selling their personal data, did not trust brands to keep that data safe, and believed that the U.S. government should regulate how companies can use it. And then there was also an April survey of 1,051 U.S. adult internet users by Jan Rain, and 53% of respondents said they're not in favor of websites or apps using what they learn about them online to target ads. The only reason I bring this up specifically is because there are some studies that also were in this eMarketer piece from before the big Facebook controversy that actually showed a lot lower numbers. So of course, when big controversies like this are occurring, obviously people have a heightened awareness. So what do we think about this, guys?
I would love to see the numbers on how many of those people surveyed how much they would pay for those services, given that they're no longer giving their data away for free.
That is a very good point, Phillip. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where people at first did not realize probably how much data was being gathered by them and used by these different companies. So obviously, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing definitely opened some eyes, but also it amazes me how people just assume like, oh, this free service is not going to be selling my data for use in advertising.
Just the bandwidth alone, somebody's got to pay for that somehow.
Yeah, there's one thing
right.
I'd just like to add on is that Cambridge Analytica definitely opened a lot of people's eyes about what can happen. But I think where the big misconception is even now is that there's still that anonymity, like how data is collected. It's not like we can target Susan Smith. We can build a profile on Susan Smith and target people like that. But it's not like all of us advertisers are out there and we have a laundry list of people with their name, their birth date, and this and that and the other. It was one of those examples of worst case scenario made it into the limelight.
Yeah,
and now it's kind of taken and ran with it and saying, well, this is what everybody does. And I think that's where the misconception comes in, is that was an app. That was people entering their information and then Cambridge not doing the ethical thing and selling it off. Or if they should have had some kind of policy in there that said, we can use your data for this. Again, going back, that's what this GDPR is. Now that has to be there, so everybody's 1,000% aware of what they're getting themselves into. But yeah, I think I expect the rates to go down only because everything's being brought into the light. There's nothing in the shadows, and I think the more that people are continuing to educate themselves, today's users, they'll find that by electing this or taking this survey, they're not giving the house away. They're just taking a survey, and they might be supplying data that people can use, but it's only to help enhance their user experience. And I'll always go back to this, being in digital marketing, obviously I know how to identify ads versus organic versus this and that and the other. But I'll never forget, and it got me to be a customer, was when I was on, a website where they kind of package up the household goods and they send them to you after you buy them. And they did retargeting on me on Facebook, and they showed all the items that I looked at. So it was kind of like, hey, don't forget, you have this stuff you looked at, you may want to buy the toilet paper now. So, it's things like that where it's meant to almost improve and streamline your experience online. It's not nefarious. We're not all out here just trying to collect your data to sell off to companies. Much of it is just to enhance the experience. It was just one bad example that was on a huge scale.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jim and Phillip, for joining me on today's show, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of the Commexis Cast. You can check us out for more on TuneIn, Stitcher, and the Apple iTunes Store to listen to us, and to view us, you can check us out on our Facebook feeds and our social media feeds, as well as YouTube and the like. So thank you very much, and have a great day.